Obviously, we've seen some of the impact that has been occurring way over the period of COVID. And this situation obviously affects us all in different ways. And clearly what we'll be looking at in the next presentation is how do we look to the future on this, and what can we see, and give you guidance on that. Of course, we've all seen elements around this, whether the schools are closing, you're working from home and it's lockdown and there's no travel restrictions and so forth. And then coupled with that, you've got all the social distancing messages and hygiene and everything like that. But actually, it's a mindset around this too. And there's a lot of fear on it. It's a fear on whether I'm going to catch it. It's a fear on infection. It's a fear if I go out. What about my family members? What's going to happen? You know, all of those things is more of a mindset issue that people are going to overcome or needing to overcome as we go forward. Actually, this was also mentioned earlier, and we hear this statement all the time about living in unprecedented times. Actually, when we have a look at this situation, we've lived through a number of others as well. And in particularly for myself, I lived through a SARS pandemic in 2003. Not the same scale, but if you have a look at all of those elements around, whether it's Ebola or MERS and situations like this, we can actually learn from it, and we can start to understand a little bit more how things react. To give you an example of it, I mean, everyone has different models around looking at the various stages of pandemics, but you've basically got the 3 stages, and again, there's variation on this, from a peak where people do become anxious, and like I've tried to present there at the start with the fear factor, and then people start to see a situation with more recovery coming, businesses are interrupted in some way, people are starting to come out and think differently, and then ultimately there's a stage of bounce back, which the recovery is starting to occur when we get back to what we know as normal. In the case with Thailand and the work that we've done here, the initial stage starts with that fear, of course, and there's also a frustration around it and a seriousness to it emotionally. And then there's also this context around what do I do and how do I react to the situation. And of course, there was a lot of stocking up going on, particularly to do with different supplies. And when you see this, you'll see that 60% from our work that we've done, 60% or almost 60%. So 6 out of 10 people stocked up in some way. And that was again around food items. It was also around medical and also cleaning items. What you'll see on the right-hand side is the top food items that they actually stocked up on. So not surprisingly, but they were essentials that people would need. So your water, your mama noodles, believe it or not, your eggs, frozen food. So that's just an example of frozen food, and also your first aid. We also looked at a number of categories, and Clara and Om had mentioned this in their presentation. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but clearly over the time period, we did see winners and those people who in industries that didn't succeed so well. And not surprisingly, and reiterating what we've seen, fine dining, coffee and milk, that's out-of-home consumption, luxury products, street food, alcohol and fashion, not surprisingly, have fared less over the pandemic. Actually, about the same period you've got, and consistent over the spending levels, you've got snacks, sporting gear, believe it or not, and again, we'd mentioned that earlier within the home, some sporting, personal care also, and cosmetics were still playing a role, and electronics as well, which is going to fit that lifestyle at home. There was also more spending, and again, not surprisingly listed to those categories before, and what we saw earlier. So anything to do with canned food, medicines, and so forth also increased, and home cooking and recipes and so forth all increased. Not surprisingly, mobile banking also increased over this particular period as well. Of course, people are not going into the banks, they're going now. So there were winners, there were losers over that particular period. They were mostly essentials, but when you have a look at bigger ticket items and so forth as well, you're looking at cars here, and of course big ticket items are going to suffer a lot more. And I've just selected a couple here just to share with you, but this shows new car sales for both cars and also motorbikes dropping, less so for obviously motorbikes, but also for cars, which is going to suffer and expecting to. Not surprising for Thailand, again, the number of people on the call here as well, I selected this one particularly for this reason, but also to do with the impact that tourism has on the economy here. And it's not exactly worked out, but it could be anywhere in between 9 and 18% with all the peripheral businesses around tourism. So it is significant. But when you have a look at all those numbers, and clearly the impact of tourism here, and not surprisingly, has also suffered as well. When we look at recovery and we look at the period beyond that, this is important for how we move forward with it. And Thais have been through similar situations as well. They've had some problems with certain situations, and they're actually quite resilient, and they're very, very adaptable. And this is important because as we move forward, we've got to try and get out of that mindset of fear and anxiety and move into the recovery and also that bounce back period, which is where we need to go to. So once we're really on the bounce back, it's actually more about how do I deal with this situation? And in a lot of cases, this will come out, which is more the economic side. And the economic side is going to play a longer, more term issue than anything else that we're seeing also in the short term there. And that's important as we move forward, and I'll cover that in a second. I won't dwell on this slide too much, other than to explain a little bit more about it. You'll get the decks. This is a quadrant chart that's been delivered by Google. And it looks at, on the left-hand axis, it looks at mobility rates, and on the bottom axis from left to right, it looks at the recovery rates. And obviously, Thailand fits in the top right-hand box, which looks at high mobility that allows people to get out and lifting restrictions. And also, then we see the recovery rate and the reduction in obviously the number of cases. So Thailand's in a pretty good shape there, as we know, and with a list of countries as we move forward. But it's not the end of this, and we need to start to look at what's going to happen for the future. We understand from consumers too, and this is not just the only angle we take on it, but this is the studies that we conducted through Marketbuzzz, and it looks at the immediate effect on a number of factors. And this is not surprising, and we've seen this before. So social media, your Netflix and your streaming of videos is coming up. Online shopping, of course, and so forth. Insurance is coming up as well. So people are looking at topping up their insurance policies and so forth, food delivery and medical services. So it's not surprising, and we've heard that before. In the short term, the recovery is expected to be around social gatherings. The recovery is around stocks, so they believe that the stock options can come back. The shopping, of course, is going to move from direct online back into that mall environment, department stores. And slowly we're going to progress back to that normal life. And we know ourselves, even grooming, of course, all the different grooming shops are now open, and we're moving ahead with that as well. In the medium term, so this is really talking about a few months away, and we're starting to see this again now, even though the study was conducted in April. You're looking at domestic travel coming back, and that's important to them. Believe it or not, your buffets, so your dinner and lunch buffets is important, and they see that coming back in the medium term. Exercise is important, so exercise is going to come back. Public transport, a little bit more resilient on, but still cautious and won't come back until the medium term. And then you're starting to see also cinema coming through as well. In the longer term, This is important. This is very important, like I mentioned earlier. And what you see in terms of the elements around this is, yes, certain restaurants are coming through, and yes, I'll get back to that, but you'll notice the other factors, which is more business survival, my monthly income, how much I'm going to spend, which is the economic side, and of course linked back to the business and the salary, which is also job security. So longer term, the more concerns around this area than what the pandemic's brought back in terms of changes in the business. We also look at paradigm shifts, and paradigm shifts are also important here. Paradigm shifts are saying that these will change for the future and change in a totally different way. Believe it or not, nightlife has come up. So people's nightlife, they believe is going to change. Hygiene, yes, they claim it will, but not so sure. But then you start to have a look at those other elements around this as well. And again, spending levels, investments, and also concerns around income, job security are still there, but also not long term. It's saying it will shift, and it'll shift permanently, which is concerning. This is one number I just want to share right from the start here. And again, this is done in April. And you've got almost two-thirds of people who have seen a decrease in their income already. And that in itself, from an economic fact, is going to have a bigger impact on the behavioural change than anything else. You may have seen this. There's obviously concerns around the GDP rates and the whole broader macroeconomy. It is going to have an impact on spending. It's going to have an impact on other elements around it, including poverty rates and so forth. And there's a genuine concern more around this and how we recover both economically and what the impact it'll have on Thailand moving forward. You'll hear more about these changes in terms of how people react to them. The reality is people's short-term behavior reverts back to normal. And then when we see that happens across many different aspects. The more concerning ones, as we mentioned, are linked to more broader macro and more economic side of things. You'll hear a bit more about that in the next presentation. But what I just wanted to leave you with was one element here. And this is a framework that we tend to use. Things are always going to change. They will do that. But as businesses and understanding it, survival is number one. But what you can do around having a look at the right information and assessing what's changing, will the changes last? How will it impact decision making, and is it going to impact now? And more importantly, what are the key elements that we need to monitor in the context of all of the factors, which is going to help my business, help my brand, help how I deal with this in the future, which is most important. And that's when information, facts, and more importantly, data comes in.